Well, good afternoon. Welcome back to Living in the Texas Hill Country. I'm Carly Howell, Blanco County Ag and Natural Resources Extension Agent. And we have what I think is a fun topic today. It's a question I get a lot in the office, and so I'm excited to learn more about it. So we've got Mason Moreland, who is our Blanco County. Do you want to say your actual title for me? Because I always forget.
Sure, yes. So my title is the Deputy Chief Appraiser here. And in addition to those duties, I handle ag and wildlife appraisals for the district.
Perfect. So, yes, we are going to talk about different exemptions. So, ag and wildlife exemptions. So, I guess kind of starting out, like, what is the difference between the two
Okay, good
for
question.
those that don't know?
Yes. And so for one, I'll start by saying, we all use the term exemption pretty broadly, but technically, for our purposes, it's a special appraisal, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of times, or at least if you go to apply through it with our office, it's going to be referred to as 1D1 open space appraisal, or special use value is the way it'll be titled. So if people that are looking at that, don't just look for ag exemption on our website because it's not going to show up under that. But the difference, yes. So really, it's concept based. So obviously, agriculture use is primarily revolves around, at least in Blanco County, livestock production and beekeeping. Those are the two main categories that we see people complete activities in. And the whole idea is that the primary use of the property should be agriculture, and you're producing an agriculture product, whether that be cow calf operation or honey production, and then assuming you meet the criteria that's laid out for agriculture use, then rather than being taxed and valued on a market value basis, that's where the productivity value comes into play. And so it's a much lesser tax rather than market value. So again, agriculture, primary concept being producing an ag product, whether it be a livestock-based product, honey. We do have a little bit of like farming or truck farming, but for Blanco County, it's very non-typical. Primarily, it's livestock and honeybees is what we see typically under the ag side of things. So wildlife, the benefit is mandated to be the same as just general ag use as far as the tax break you get. But the concept obviously is going to be different in the sense that you're doing things to the property to manage it to be better for the wildlife that is on the property. The size of the property often dictates what type of species you're going to target. But again, you create a plan and implement that plan for the wildlife that's there. So that's really the big difference is producing an ag product for agriculture and then managing the property to be better for wildlife, whether it be for recreation, or hunting, or whatever use you want it to be for, is all acceptable under the tax code as far as the special appraisal goes. So that's kind of the main difference between the two.
And so for the livestock side of things, so you'd mentioned like cow calf operations.
Sure.
So I'm assuming like sheep, goats would also fall under the category. And this is one that I've always wondered, what about like, and probably hill country, not so much, but other areas of the state, do you know, like, could you do like raise chickens for either uh, for their meat or do eggs? I know that's probably a weird one, and that may be out of your like wheelhouse slightly, being in Blanco County.
So yes, those are all viable options.
Okay.
Cattle is I would say the most typical in
Yeah.
Blanco County, but yes, we have sheep and goats. Exotics also fall into that category. So there's actually that's
Yes.
been a growing interest, where you have axis deer or black buck antelope or oryx or something like that, and you raise them and treat them the same as you would livestock. Chickens can be an option, but there is a line to, if you read the tax code, it's got to be primary use and it can't be a hobby farm. So if you are going to do like a chicken operation, whether it be for eggs or meat production, it's got to be a pretty large scale operation. So most people here, they have your typical backyard setup, which is great, but you're not going to get an ag use for that. There was one gentleman I can remember that did have like a commercial, like several thousands of birds operation, but he's no longer here. So that's been the only one since I've been doing this that I've seen, but it is doable. One of the odd ones that people probably don't think about too is pigs. So, you know, I had a gentleman approach me that was going to do pigs for his ag use, and I kind of explained to him, well, that typically that doesn't work because they got to be, well, free range on the property. And he goes, no, that's exactly what these are. So he had a special breed of pig, and they had 60 acres, and they roamed the entire 60 acres. Had several hundred units of pigs there, and he did it with that. So again, sometimes it's not always the most common that can get it there. There are always different options. But yeah, most definitely. Exotics, sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, sometimes poultry. But again, Blanco County wise, the most we see is going to be cattle and some sheep and goats typically. And I will say horses, that I don't that's probably going to differ the most from county to county. A lot of times it's required to be a breeding operation to where you have mares and foals. Blanco County looks at it a little bit differently. So the tax code explains that you can raise and or keep livestock. So as long as the horses are treated similarly to other livestock as far as having access to the whole property and being used the same way, we'll actually allow those whether they're breeding or not. As far as livestock is concerned. So
And so I guess I'll touch another thing is, so you said with honeybees. So with a
yes,
lot of times with agriculture or with livestock, it is based off of a stocking rate. Is you have
correct.
to meet a stocking rate. But for something like honeybees, how does that work? Because you don't exactly have a stocking rate. You kind of have a stocking rate for honeybees. This is a little bit different.
It's a hive stocking rate, if you want to call it that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so every county will kind of draw up hive requirements, is what we call it. So basically, there's going to be a minimum amount of beehives that you have to establish on the property. Acreage is also more important when it comes to bees because there's a minimum and also a maximum. So for beekeeping, it's between 5 and 20 acres, and that's it. So your property has to be within those two sizes to qualify. And then basically, we keep it pretty simple. We have either 6 or 8 hives, depending on the size of the property. So I think it's a break right in the middle. So between 5 and 12.9 acres is 6 hives minimum, and then 13 to 20 acres is 8 hives minimum. So basically, again, maintain each hive, make sure you have that total number, and then you're good to go as far as we're concerned. But again, that varies widely through counties. I know Hayes County is our neighbor to the east, and their top hive requirements almost double what ours is. And then a lot of other surrounding counties are somewhere in between. So again, if anybody's listening and wants to apply for it, I just stress to make sure you talk to the appropriate county that you're in to make sure you're looking at the right number of animals or beehives in this case.
And I have a question about that too.
Yes.
So, as far as having livestock or bees, we'll say bees are livestock in this sense, to get your special appraisal. Is is there any requirement for making sure that they are being produced for production, or can you just have them on your property, as kind of pets, more or less?
Yes. So again, when you read the tax code section talking about agriculture special valuation, the statement is raising and or keeping livestock. It's kind of at least previous versions of the rules were a little more focused on production or income production from livestock to qualify. But based on the literature and the tax code nowadays, as long as you have them and the primary use of the property is to maintain those animal units or hives on the property, we believe that qualifies you. So there's no monetary requirement. You do need to produce an ag product, but what you do with
Sure.
that product is up to you. So again, there's no requirement to sell the items. It could just be for personal use. But again, as long as you're producing that ag product is the main takeaway for qualifying for ag.
Sure. And does that vary county by county, or is
It,
that pretty general?
it will, I believe. Again, every county will interpret that statement differently. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to ag use. But yeah, I would just again check with your county. If it's a different county, they may be, look at it the same way as us. Some may want to, see a calf or want to see your honey being sold or something. So yeah, just check the local county that you're in to make sure that what you're doing is appropriate.
So I guess I guess we'll kind of take, I don't know if it'd be a step back or a step forward. But if so, before we hopped on, you had said that one of the common questions that you get from people is people want to know, how do you get into the wildlife side of things? Can you just decide one day, wake up one day and be like, I want a wildlife tax valuation on my property. How do I make that happen? Can you immediately jump into wildlife?
Sometimes. So you can't start with it, but the way the tax code is structured and the way the requirements work on our end is it has to have a ag history prior to being able to qualify for a wildlife appraisal. So if you have a property that's historically had ag on it the whole time, and they currently have at least 5 years of agriculture history, then at that point, assuming you meet some other parameters, possibly acreage minimums, and then creating your wildlife plan, it is possible to jump from ag to wildlife, and continue the valuation through wildlife then. However, what you can't do is if you have a property that does not have any ag history at all, and the property owner decides, hey, I want a wildlife appraisal on the property, you can't just immediately go to doing wildlife activities without that ag history and qualify. So again, you always have to have at least 5 years of agriculture history, or if a property has already had the wildlife on it and has been maintaining a wildlife appraisal, and then the property sells or transfers, that new owner would be able to continue that in their own way if they want to. But again, yeah, the main thing is the 5 year ag history has to be there before you can do wildlife activities on the property.
So I would imagine that if someone was going to purchase property, a lot of the times they probably, as a selling point, would say that, this property is has a wildlife valuation or has an ag valuation on it. If for some reason the person doesn't know, they just purchased this property, it wasn't mentioned, can they come to y'all to figure out whether or not their property in the past or currently has that on their property?
Most definitely, yes. So the process for the appraisal district is, anytime a property transfers ownership, the following January is when not just ag and wildlife, but homestead and other exemptions, that's when that process takes place till we notify the new property owner that all of the previous owners' exemptions or appraisals are going to be reset, is what we call it. And the new owner now has an opportunity to reapply for whatever they're going to continue on the property. So they will get, official correspondence from our office about that. If before that they have questions, then yes, I always encourage taxpayers to come to our office, ask those questions. We can give them information on, what historically it's been used for, what their options are moving forward, and kind of make sure everybody's on the same page. But if they don't do that, then they'll at least get that letter from us to say, hey, this is in your court now. You need to do something if you want to maintain this. And then that kind of starts the conversation of what your options are and what they do moving forward. And then, the time frame for that is any exemption or appraisal we do at the office. The effective date is always January of each year, and the deadline to apply for that is by end of April of that same year. So for instance, if a property owner purchases the property right now, they'll get a letter from us in January of 26 saying you need to reapply, and then they'll have until end of April of 2026 to get all the paperwork, get the animals, get the hives, whatever they're doing, situated on the property, to maintain that for the 26 tax year.
And if they don't, if they just I'll say they just choose to ignore it, the letter got lost in the mail, what have you, if something happens and they don't do anything, basically it is lost, correct?
Yes. So it's a little bit of a process, but yes. So basically so we send appraisal notices out in middle of April. So right before the deadline for ag, the new property owner will also be getting an appraisal saying, here's the changes made to your appraisal. So assuming a property owner has not applied yet, it'll be visible. That'll be the first time it's visible to them that, hey, the appraisal is no longer applied to the property. So that'll be the first thing. Then once we get past the actual application deadline, sometime in May is when I will send out any of the ag denials. So if a person has not reapplied for the property, then they'll get an official notice from our office that says, hey, we have not received an application. The ag or wildlife is being denied at this time for failure to apply. And so they'll get that notification from us. And they still have a small window to get what's called late ag. So you are still eligible to apply for an ag or wildlife before our property values are certified, which is always towards the end of July. So if you didn't get the first one or didn't respond to the first notices within the normal time frame, then you have a little period between basically May to July to where you could apply late and still receive the ag or wildlife, but there's a 10% late penalty that is included in there. So there's plenty of opportunities and options to get it because it is confusing, especially if you've never dealt with it before. So there's all kinds of opportunities to get that. But if for some reason a property owner does not do any of those, then yes, the ag or wildlife value comes off of the property. The taxes then are calculated based on the full value of the market rather than the productivity. And depending on the size of the property, that could be a substantial difference, obviously. So it's always in the property owner's best interest to reapply. And I always encourage them to come to our office to ask us questions if they have any.
Yeah, nice little surprise whenever taxes come around and they're like, wait a minute, I did not pay this last
Yes.
year.
Yes,
So
we,
what
we
is
do
going
get that
on?
sometimes, and it's
I
at that time though, unfortunately, it's usually too late when you get the tax bill. So the takeaway is to pay attention, to file on time, and you can avoid all those issues altogether. And I guess on that note, before we move on, there is also a lapse period to where we mentioned the 5-year history earlier. So again, when applying for ag, you have to show that the property's had 5 years of ag history to be granted, or wildlife, regardless, you got to have that history. So let's say the ag comes off this first year that the new owner has the property. As long as a year immediately after that, they get reapplied, it is possible to get it without starting the 5-year history process over again. So basically there's a year grace period. So if they for some reason missed the first year, but they are going to do some sort of ag or wildlife operation on the property, it's still possible to get that the next year. But again, they definitely need to reapply for it by that time. If not, and they miss that one, then you start the whole 5-year process over again before you ever gain ag back on the property. But it's really rare, to be honest with you. Typically, people will see that it's a big deal. Most people in Texas are aware that this is a big break in taxes, and so it's typically not a big issue about having people not reapply or lose the exemption.
And what about, say that there's a property, which this may be rare too, but if a property has never had any kind of exemption on it before, I guess what would be the first step somebody would take? Say they just bought the property, it's never had anything, and they call you and say, what do I need to do? What's your answer?
So typically, you have to do something. So, I'll explain to them the history process and let them know that, let me back up a minute. First, I'll ask them about the property. So we want to make sure that whatever property they're dealing with is going to, qualify, usually based on size. So again, I mentioned earlier, the beekeeping is between 5 and 20 acres. We don't have any, room to move that number. It's 5 to 20. So if you fall within that, you have an opportunity for that. For the livestock side of things, it's typically 10 acres or larger. So the first step, typically, if I have a new property owner asking about it, we'll check acreage and make sure that that's doable. So assuming we get past that and they qualify based on size, then I'll explain the situation. Okay, you got to start using the property for ag purposes, whether that be bees or whether that be some sort of livestock or whatever the ag activities they're doing, and then maintain that for a period of 5 years before we get to the end of this process and get granted this special appraisal. So again, it's kind of probably somewhat unique to Blanco County, but we do have a history file that we'll keep with property owners. So rather than just leaving it all up to the property owner to keep all the documentation for all 5 years and then bring all that to us at one time at the end of the period. We'll kind of work with them each year. So, the first year they get going, we'll encourage them to, typically we go ahead and fill out that Ag 1D1 application that ties them to the property and all of their particular information. And then we'll go ahead and get copies of what information they've done so far on the property. And then just keep building that file. And it's pretty easy when we get to the end of the 5 years. If you've done it with us, we're all on the same page. It's pretty clear that the primary use has been this, and it makes it pretty easy for somebody to gain that ag or wildlife valuation. So, again, yeah, the main thing is reach out to, whether it's our county or your other county, reach out to the ag appraiser for that county and inquire about starting that process. And then make sure you know what's required, what they're going to look for. So when you turn everything in, that it complies.
And so with that documentation, so that for a lot of people, that's going to look things like feed, you go to purchase
Yeah.
feed, you build fences, you fix fences, you purchase parts for fixing a water trough, vet bills,
Yeah.
because those are always coming down the pipe. If you have animals, I
For
don't know
sure.
so much about bees. I imagine with bees, there's probably not too many
Not many
vet
vet bills for bees,
not
no.
many vet bills for bees. But obviously purchasing equipment to, or if you're leasing hives
Sure.
from people, paying
Sure.
them to debt or paying people to come look after your hives. Because I know nothing about bees. If you put a bunch of hives on my property, I'd be like, that's nice. I don't know how to take care. I
Yeah.
can't take care of bees. I don't know what I have to do.
Yes, no, receipts are always good. Pictures are helpful in some cases. Obviously, if it's an animal or livestock purchase or sale of that animal unit, and same thing with the beehives. If you're buying those, whether it's the bee nukes as they call them or nucleuses, which is basically a package of bees
Oh
that you
yeah.
install in the hive box, so you keep receipts for that. And that's the typical thing that we see from people. If it is a lease situation to where whether it's a grazing lease or whether it is a bee lease. Typically, we just get a contract, they'll have a written lease drawn up and we'll get a copy of that. And so that's kind of forms of documentation. Again, primarily receipts, some pictures, and then lease agreements. So that's the primary thing that you would want to keep track of when going through that process.
What about like water meter readings if people have, I mean, obviously up in the hill country, not too many in the way of crops. It's a
Right.
little rocky for that. Um, but even if they're just maintaining, troughs or whatever for their livestock, water meter readings would also work as well.
Yes, to some extent. It depends on the type of use, obviously, as far as what they're trying to document. If it's a livestock, they obviously have to have water, but they can turn that in, but it might be hard to prove that you've had livestock on the property if the only thing you turn into us is a water meter reading.
Right.
So I would accept that, but I would probably also ask, hey, I also need to see
Other,
some proof that you have livestock on the property. If it is, like, yes, we do not have really many farming or orchard, or we do have some vineries, but primarily the vineries we have are in conjunction with beekeeping or some other use. Yeah, so, for us, just a simple water reading as to like irrigate, if you're irrigating crops or something, that doesn't really apply to Blanco County. But I assume in a situation where maybe that does, that might be a valuable piece of information you can track and turn in. But yeah, primarily we're looking for, auction, seller, or buying receipts. Pictures is fine, feed receipts, veterinary bills. Those are the primary, and lease agreements are the primary things that people turn into us to prove that, hey, this is what we've been doing.
so it seems like, honestly, it seems like a fairly simple, straightforward process in order to get started. It's just simply filling out some paperwork and then start start doing it and
Yes,
just keeping track of, have a little folder or whatever to keep your receipts in line. If the
exactly.
dashboard of your truck works, go for it, but you might lose a couple on a windy day.
Yeah.
But whatever
Yes.
works.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, the hardest part is doing it. So yeah, the
Yes.
paperwork obviously is not that big of a deal. But yeah, the main thing is, whatever ag practice or wildlife practice you're doing, you have to do it, document it, and submit that information to us.
And so with that livestock, so is there a certain, do you have to adhere to stocking rates?
Uh, yes. So, obviously it's going to be dependent on the well, a number of things, but the property size, the type of property they're on, the type of animal. And so again, every county is going to have a stock-in ratio and a carrying capacity kind of sheet in their ag guidelines. So again, if you're in another county, you should look at that because it does differ based on the terrain, the type of grasses that are there, all those factors, the moisture that you get. So yes, it's without getting into too much detail, like just an average for Blanco County is normally about one animal unit to every 25 acres. The animal unit again will vary based on size of the animal. So a cow or a cow and a calf is considered one unit, whereas it takes 4 sheep to equal one animal unit. So that's why when we're looking at our stocking ratios, we're going to use the term animal unit because you can apply that broadly, and then based on the animal you choose will kind of depend on the total number you'll be expected to have. And again, I think for today's conversation, I'm not going to try to go through the list of all of them, but each county should have a sheet that kind of explains here's what it is. So if you're concerned about what number of total animals you'll need, it should be pretty simple to go find how many acres do you have, how many units do you need, and then the type of animal will kind of show how many total animals you need there. But yeah, again, it still varies largely. We have some properties that might be one animal unit to 15 acres, and then we have some that might be one animal unit to 50 acres. So again, it just largely depends on the property. And we try to work with the landowners because we don't want them to overutilize the property. So, we tend to really try to work with them, especially in drought conditions, and on smaller properties. I don't want to use the term lenient, but, we do show some grace as far as it comes to rotating animals in and out and making sure we're not hurting the property, because at the end of the day, it's the last thing we want to do. So yes, but yeah, definitely always some sort of stock and ratio that landowners need to be aware of in order to qualify.
Um, so you have somebody that they've done their 5 years of ag, and they've decided that I want to switch over to the wildlife side of things. What needs to be done in order to go from ag to wildlife?
Yes. So you do have to maintain ag for a year. So like say you've done your 5-year history, you do have to have for year 6 is technically when the ag would apply. You do have to keep it for that year before you would be eligible to swap over. And so say we make it that far, a couple of things we ask is, has the property changed in size? Because there is a rule that shows that if a property has been changed in size or reduced in size, I should say, in the prior year, there are some acreage minimums that may apply to the wildlife side of things. So if a property has been reduced in size, so say you buy 10 acres from your neighbor that had 30 acres. So they are left with 20 and you're left with 10. The rule says that a property must be 20 acres or larger if the size of the property has been reduced in the prior year. So at that point, the seller would still be able to maintain wildlife with their 20 acres, but the buyer with only 10 acres at that point would have to go back to ag. So again, even though there's that full history of ag use on that property, if it's been reduced in size, you have to pay attention to that acreage minimum. If that's not the case and the property has maintained the same size throughout, as long as you have that 5-year ag history, then you can submit for wildlife. And so at that point, basically, you are generating a wildlife plan for the property, which indicates what you're going to do to make it better and to manage the wildlife that is there. And again, without trying to get into way too much detail, the size will kind of determine the type of species you're going to manage for. The smaller the property, the smaller the animal, if you want to look at it that way. But, typically songbirds is going to be the target species for, say, anything less than like 100 acres is kind of what we look at. There are some other things in between that you can do. But for today's purposes, this is basically less than 100 songbirds and smaller animals is going to be your target. For 100 acres or larger, deer tend to be the focus after that point, along with some other, turkey and other species. But basically create a plan, manage for a target species, and then complete activities. And so by the law, you have to do 3 out of the 7 eligible activities annually to keep your wildlife going. And then within those 7 categories, there's obviously a ton of detailed activities that fall within those. Yeah, there's and correct me if I miss any, but I think there's habitat control, erosion control, predator control, provide food, provide water, provide shelter, and then census counts. So I
Yep.
think those are the got them all. Those are the 7.
I always miss one. I'm always like, wait, there's one I'm
Yes.
missing. But yeah.
Yes. So those are the 7 that a property owner will choose from. And so if you want to do all of them, that's awesome. But the requirement is a minimum of 3. So you would need to, in your plan, incorporate 3 of those. And then each year you would need to maintain those 3 or at least 3 activities to keep it going. Food, water, and shelter is what I see commonly, especially for songbirds. That tends to be a common one. When you do get to larger properties, then habitat and census counts tend to be other ones that are added in. But yeah, so again, the concept will be we're applying a wildlife management plan, what we're going to do to the property to make it better, 3 out of the 7 activities at least, and then you start implementing that. And so once we get past the initial plan phase, and now we're going to consider you wildlife, the next step is keeping track of the activities that you're doing. This is where we see the most difference from county to county as far as how they require their landowners to track that. Some don't want any information and just go out and inspect it. Others don't do as many inspections but require annual reports, as they call them, to be turned in. We do require annual reports, but rather than every property owner turning it into us each year, we break it up, and basically half of the county reports one year, the next half reports the other year. So we're getting 2 years of information at a time from each property owner, and we continue on that cycle. And then usually about every 5 years, we'll ask the property owner, if they're still the owner, to update that original plan to make sure that nothing has changed or updated to that point. So just after that, a big cycle. Every 5 years, a new plan, and every 2 years is when you turn your update to us.
And when you mentioned the plan, is this a plan that, and I'm sorry if you already answered this, but is this something that like they've kind of made on their own, or does your office help them do that, or do they have to have a consultant help them?
Great question. That's a one that most everybody asks. All of the above could work. Now, my position is not necessarily to advise people. I definitely will help people the most I can. But typically they'll either be if they're confident enough to complete the plan on their own, that's perfectly acceptable. If they don't want to do it themselves, they can reach out to a biologist, Texas Parks and Wildlife, AgriLife, or whoever to help them, possibly put a plan together, look at their property, give them ideas, or they can hire private consultants, which also do the same thing. They'll come out and meet with the property owner, look at the property, create a plan for them. So it really is going to be up to the property owner as to how they want to go about it. I don't, when I'm grading the plan, if you want to use that term, I don't look at who's doing it. It just has to
Sure.
make sense. So, if they can do it and they put it on paper and it all makes sense with what they're wanting to do, then there's typically no issues at all. But if you're a property owner that has no idea and it's obviously a big reduction and you feel more comfortable with having somebody with experience help you, then that's definitely an option as well.
Awesome.
And the nice thing is so TPWD actually has like pretty much a fill in the blank,
Yes.
like check a
Yeah.
box, like management plan that you can go through. It is like, I'm trying to think of, it's like filling out your name, some like habitat stuff for your property, choosing a target species. I'm trying to think what else is on the first place. I know I'm missing some stuff on the first page, but then after that, it's choosing what 3 of those 7 activities you want, and then under those choosing, I always call them sub activities. I don't know what they're actually
Yes.
called, but
Yeah.
it's like under habitat control, you can do things like grazing and reseeding. Under predator control, it's choosing your species that you're controlling. I think under habitat control, you can also control for things like feral hogs. So it's really
Yes.
not, they're not trying to make it hard. It's really,
No.
it would be really challenging to not be able to fill those 3 of 7 activities. I think if people really like went through and looked, you could probably honestly hit probably about like a good 5, if
Oh,
not
yeah.
4 of the 7 activities, because there's a lot of like those sub activities that overlap between the different activity levels, at least on the Texas Parks and Wildlife version. But if you go to their website, you can find, or just talk to your biologist, and they are well trained in helping you fill that out. And it's just like I said, just a fill in the blank and check here and check there and maybe sign it at the end and hand it over.
Pretty much, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty user friendly. I would agree with that. And that's kind of what I tell people. Again, I'm not taking away from the consultants or the other biologists. They all do, great job. Nothing I've got is bad by any means. But yeah, it is very doable to do it yourself if that's something you're wanting to do. And one thing too, I think most counties do require a little more than just that form. So like for
Mhm.
instance, Blanco County, typically there's like a narrative essay summary that's going to be included that kind of summarizes all your goals and objectives for the property. And then also typically we ask for some sort of map. So like, if you already have activities in place, you can indicate where those are at. If you don't have them done yet, but this is where you want to do it, you can put those down. So typically like where your feeder location is, where your water location is, if you're going to be doing brush management, what area of the property you're doing that in. Those are things that we ask for. And so it does a couple of things. So it obviously lets us look at it and make sure it makes sense because if you have 10 birdhouses on the property, they shouldn't all be in one little bitty area. They should be distributed. So we kind of look for those things. And then also for inspection purposes, when we come out to look at the property, gives us an idea of what to look for and kind of where things are at. So yeah, but again, still very user friendly. If they fill that form out with those couple of things, typically it's not that hard to get that approved and get going. Again, the hardest part as with the ag, and getting the animals, it's doing that wildlife activities, putting the work in and keeping track of it.
Yeah, and I think another thing is one thing that I've always heard stressed is making sure with wildlife it could be really easy to get, I'll say, complacent with it because
Yes.
you may be running livestock still on the property, you might not. But because you're not actually like having to do a daily checks, daily care of the wildlife, because I mean you provide the stuff, they pretty much take care of themselves. Making sure that it is active management. So if you're doing, those nest boxes, making sure that they get cleaned out. If they're looking a little sad, run down, that you're actually going in replacing them. Because obviously if y'all come out and you see these bird boxes that are supposed to, be housing birds, but they're falling apart and they just look terrible. It's like, well, the birds they're not going to use them. So definitely making sure that you do the active side of it, making sure that your waters are working, your those bird boxes, the feeders are working. Because I'm sure there's nothing that's going to ruin their day more as if y'all come out to check and you're like, I'm sorry, you're not actively managing for the wildlife.
Right.
Yes, no, you want to make sure that you are doing the activities that you say you are. And yeah, there are some items that are pretty easy to maintain and keep going. But yes, again, like you said, the birdhouses make sure they're cleaned and they're providing that source that they're supposed to be. Just like feeder, you can have a feeder, but you still have to make sure it's got food in it for
Yes,
them to
that
use it
too.
right. It can't just be sitting there. So yeah, definitely make sure that you continue to do all those activities if you want to take advantage of the tax break that it gives you.
So you touched on feeders, and I guess this question just kind of popped into my head. So with those feeders, do you have to provide that food 365, or can you kind of, I'll say, choose critical time periods for the wildlife, like for, when does are lactating, that's a stressful period. When, bucks are trying to recover from rut, that's kind of a stressful period for them. Obviously, most people do it during hunting season, but during the
Right.
summer, they just kind of let it go. So can people kind of pick and choose with a feeder when they do or don't feed, or is it something they have to do all year round?
No, it can definitely be seasonal. So, like if on that form that you were talking about earlier, the wildlife plan, when you fill it out, there is a section under supplemental food. It'll ask that question. So it asks, is it a seasonal program or is it a year-round program? And either one in that case is okay. And so what I tell people typically is, if you're going to do year-round, a lot of times they'll alternate the type of feed that they use. So corn is, what everybody, the most popular option to use, but it's more of an attractant rather than a supplement, right? So typically when somebody's going to come in and say, hey, I'm doing supplemental feed for deer, I'll make sure that they're aware that they need to incorporate some type of protein in that supplement. So it's not going to be just corn that's allowed. There's various protein and mineral blocks that can go with that, as well as some sort of protein feeder, whether it be, the same type of feeder in broadcast, or whether it's just a free choice to where you just fill it and they come in and use it as they need. But yes, so typically they'll kind of document in that plan that they're filling out when they do it, whether it's year round or seasonal, and then what they're putting out. I think those are actually specific questions under that food category to put in there. So they will need to choose. If it's a year-round thing, what I see larger ranchers do is, during the actual hunting season, they'll kind of use corn as the food source, and then for the stress periods, so prior to hunting season, when there's lactating and horn or antler growth, there's protein, and then sometimes to later late season or right after season, they'll feed protein again to kind of help the deer pick back up from the rut and from if it was a hard winter. So that could be an option there. But yeah, and bird seed, there's a lot of birds are seasonal or can be. So obviously the type of feed may change there, or people may just put it out at certain times of the year. But yeah, either way is fine. But you do just need to make sure when you're creating your plan, you kind of document that so we know what it is that you're doing and the approach that you're taking.
All right, Carly. I know we're coming up at our 1 o'clock hour. Do you have any other questions? I know we've kind of like we could talk like I feel like another
I
like
know. I
30 to
have a lot of
45,
questions,
maybe
but
an
I'm like,
almost another hour about
yes.
this. Because that's the thing is there's so many little like
There's a
there's
lot
so
of
many
nitpicky things.
yes.
Yeah. That like, I don't know, I started thinking about the three things that you have to do, like is that per year? What if you want to change it? And, just some little things like that. But that would probably be something you have to reach out to your county appraisal district and kind of find those more nitpicky questions out.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all, what we're talking about here today is, my position in Blanco County. This does pertain to Blanco County, but if you're in a different county, obviously you want to check with them prior to making any decisions. But to answer a couple of those questions real fast, yeah, typically the activity is an annual thing. So you need to make sure you're doing 3 out of the 7 each year. Blanco County, when we look at it, even if they don't necessarily exactly match what you put in the original plan, as
Sure.
long as you're doing 3 activities that make sense for the property and you're keeping track of it, we're not going to fuss over did that exactly match up with what you put on the plan or not. So yeah, it's an annual 3 activity requirement. But yes, again, I would check with your own county if it's different than Blanco County as far as what they require and how they want that submitted.
Sure.
Okay, well, I just have one last question because I think this is one that some people might have. So obviously, if you're ag, you have like a rate you have to follow, like a stocking rate. So for a lot of those management practices, is there a certain like, do you have to put out a certain number of bird feeders, or I guess we kind of touched on the feeding all year round, but are there a certain like standards that have to be met for each of those practices in order to say yes, this works?
Yes, so and that it's a little more complicated with wildlife because there's a lot more moving parts. And again, largely it's going to be based on size of property and target species as far as what we require. So the answer is yes. But I'm not going to try to throw a bunch of numbers out, but yeah, obviously if you have a 15-acre property versus a 1,500-acre property, the level of intensity is obviously going to be different as far as the number of feeders and what you're doing. Yeah, again, I would just encourage somebody that's looking into this to talk with your biologist because they can obviously help you make sure that what you're doing makes sense for the size, and talk with the appraisal district in your county to make sure that what they're putting out makes sense. But yeah, in general, there are some there's no steadfast or hard and fast requirements, but you have to make sure that it makes sense, basically. So, make sure that it's not just one birdhouse for 100 acres. It's going to have to be a little bit more than that. So, again, I think that the best thing there is just talk to your local appraisal district or local biologist to make sure that the number makes sense.
Awesome. Well, Mason, thank you so much. Like I said, I know we like we covered a lot, and we could go for a whole nother hour and still never cover everything.
For sure.
But I think you did a fantastic job of at least getting people started or thinking about if they're going to do this, what those first steps are. I know Carly and I are very appreciative that you took your lunch
Yes.
hour to speak with us today.
Yes, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're very welcome. And yeah, again, I just can't stress enough. I think reach out to the local appraisal district, talk to them. That's where all the information lies. So if you want to get started, reach out, and we're always happy to help and get you on the path.
Awesome.
Well, thank you again, Mason. We hope y'all have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day. We will see y'all next week. So bye everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.